Welcome to Policy Matters, a program of the League of Women Voters of the Fort Wayne area. I'm Nancy McCammon Hansen. I'm the convener of the League of Women Voters here. And today I have with me Melissa Reinhart, who is going to be talking to us about welcoming Fort Wayne. But before Melissa does that, I want her to tell us a little bit about her educational background because it's very, very interesting.
Thank you, Nancy, for this opportunity to speak about welcoming Fort Wayne. I bring a mixed bag of tricks with my skill set. I'm an academic, and more specifically, I'm a cultural anthropologist. So I've worked with disadvantaged populations. I've taught. I've done considerable research and writing for over 20 years now. I've worked with all groups from Native American to Hispanics to African American, and more recently, after returning to Fort Wayne, which is my hometown, 5 years ago, I have really invested myself into refugee initiatives here in this community.
Okay, cultural anthropology. How did you get interested in that?
Well, I credit in part my father. He's a retired social studies history teacher, so that spurred my love of history. And in visiting various forts and reenactments as a child, of course, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but in looking back, I very much did because I saw how important history is. But I also had this thirst for wanting to know about those cultures of the past and also different cultures, the diversity we have in the world today. So I found cultural anthropology to be the perfect home for someone with my background.
Okay, and since we both love history and we're both interested in the Miami Indians in this area and their history.
Yes, we are.
And we've both worked at the YWCA, and we haven't known each other more than, about a year now, I think? So, year and a half, maybe?
I think a little bit longer
maybe
than that.
Maybe a little longer. But anyway, we're going to go on with our program. Welcoming Fort Wayne. Tell me how that came about.
Sure. Welcoming Fort Wayne is a local initiative of a much larger national effort that's called Welcoming America. Welcoming America provides a roadmap and support for communities like ours to become more inclusive toward immigrants and actually everyone. Welcoming America began about 8 years ago and has spurred a growing movement across the U.S., and it's estimated that 1 in 8 Americans live in a welcoming community. Now, the only official welcoming community in the state of Indiana is Indianapolis. So myself, along with a handful of other folks over a year ago, wanted to begin the process of changing that. We would like Fort Wayne to become a certified welcoming city. And we've, since that time, have done a lot of work. We've come up with a mission statement and a beautiful logo that shows the confluence of our 3 rivers, which has brought people together for millennia, diverse peoples at that. But, you know, we want a community where everyone, because of their background, not in spite of, but because of their background, culture, or heritage, is valued and included in all aspects of daily living. So we seek out partnerships with others in the community that can help with immigrant integration.
Okay. I'm interested. Who started Welcoming America, and who certifies you as a welcoming community?
It's actually the Welcoming America at the national level. They will vet our application. They will actually do an on-site tour of the different programs and initiatives that by the time they come will be underway here in Fort Wayne. And there's a hefty fee, of course, which we're planning a fundraiser to raise some money for. But it's something that could really inspire a lot of change and bring a lot of good visibility for Fort Wayne as far as economic attraction of new workers and industry and things like that. This is something that mayors, when they get together nationally at their conferences, this is something that mayors brag about. And we want Mayor Henry and whoever follows him to be able to go to those conferences and say, hey, Fort Wayne is a welcoming city too, and it's official. So
it's not just a feel-good kind of movement. It also has an economic impact on a community.
Economic, social, cultural, political. No, this is not a feel-good. Anyone can do that, but this Welcoming America stands behind communities like ours that are striving toward this, we want to make impactful change, and more specifically, well, in two areas. For immigrants, we want to ease their integration process, because the culture shock, especially for some of these groups, is so tremendous, and unless the listeners have traveled and you've never experienced that before, it is so overwhelming. But we also want to raise awareness in the general community about the importance of having our immigrant community here. Fort Wayne, aside from its important Miami history, has always been a nexus for peoples from all over the world. So really, the different peoples that we have here today is really just a continuance of history of peoples with different language and cultures coming together, and it hasn't always been easy.
We talked a little bit a few days ago about how you're going to raise awareness of immigrant issues. Can you delve into that a little bit more deeply?
Sure. Well, one important medium for that is actually our Facebook page. I have, I manage that page, and I post important resources and announcements about events that are going on in the community. News, it's all very positive messaging. This is a nonpartisan. Our Welcoming Fort Wayne is nonpartisan, so I like to keep things positive and informative and factual. Another important way that we're raising awareness is through the You Are Welcome Here yard sign campaign, which I began back in December.
And I saw one of those driving to the station. It had You Are Welcome Here in English, I believe Arabic,
Yes.
Burmese, and Spanish.
Correct. Those are the four most spoken languages here. And up until really about a year or two ago, French was in the top four, and actually Arabic has surpassed French.
Interesting, because, French used to be the language of diplomacy eons ago when I was in high school and college. Is it still? I have no idea. Do you?
I don't know myself.
Ah, interesting, because I remember in Vietnam, when we were in Vietnam, that the Paris peace talks were done in French, because that was the language of diplomacy. Okay, so your program targets...
Well, for now, it's raising awareness with the general public, but as well as creating partnerships to ease integration for newcomers. So we have, but really our audience is everyone. We all influence one another's lives, and we all we all need one another. So, who are we targeting, or who's our target audience? Newcomers, providers, citizens, everyone.
Okay.
Because we want an inclusive community.
You said something at a meeting last evening that we were both at about the difference in language. You called it flipping the script. Can you explain what flipping the script is?
Sure. Flipping the script is, and actually some really interesting research just came out about this 2-3 weeks ago, is that when you make a semantic shift in replacing 1, 2, 3 words in a phrase with other words, how it actually changes brain waves in people when they hear that information, when they receive that information for you. So it was really important for us when we created our mission statement to not say that, we want a community where everyone, in spite of their background, culture, or heritage. No, not in spite of. Those are good things. We want it because we want an inclusive community because of background, culture, or heritage. And that may seem pretty minimal to listeners, but actually changing that phrasing really does shift the way a person thinks about welcoming, thinks about immigrants and refugees in our community. And that's what we want to do.
And I think that's one of the facets of Miami culture that I always thought was so interesting, in the fact that the English were encouraged not to have anything to do with the Miami, but the French were encouraged to intermarry and intermingle the cultures, which you don't find all that often. I come from Nebraska, out on the Great Plains. People did not mingle with the Native Americans out there. And that's one of the things about Fort Wayne history that I think is so fascinating, is that intermingling of the French and the Miami.
Well, and having studied Great Lakes Indian history, and we don't have time to discuss it in depth, but it's actually not unique. The French fur traders needed native peoples to know where the best beavers were and the best hunting grounds were and the trails to get to them. So these Frenchmen would seek Indian wives by marrying into the community that secured his and then her economic future. So that was actually very common throughout the Great Lakes.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned something today. Why are you working through associated churches?
Sure. I'd say the majority of welcoming efforts throughout the country are housed in city governments. And some are associated with nonprofits, and just a few are connected to religious organizations. And here in this community, I feel very fortunate that we have Associated Churches of Allen County and Fort Wayne who stepped up and supporting us. So they are our nonprofit fiscal sponsor for welcoming Fort Wayne. Really, we couldn't have a more perfect fit. We're known for being a city of churches, and knowing what I do about the history of this community and the different ways various churches or congregations have helped immigrants since the 19th century, it just makes sense that that's where we're housed for now.
Okay. And you work with Roger Reese,
Yes,
who
I do.
is the Executive Director of Associated Churches, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I know Roger. I thought you had a quote on some of the notes that we were comparing, and it you talked a little bit about Scripture and how Christian Scripture says that Jesus was a political refugee, which I think a lot of us forget. And the admonition, love your neighbor as yourself,
Correct.
is a part of our theology. And also the I was a stranger and you welcomed me, which is something that I think far too often too many of us forget.
I agree.
And I know I'm in the process now. My husband just retired as a pastor, and we are visiting different churches, and it's interesting to see how you are greeted in almost a family when you're new. And I can't imagine moving from a foreign country to the United States. I think it would be very, very difficult.
Very difficult.
How many immigrants and refugees roughly live in the Fort Wayne area?
Okay. Well, the last American Community Survey analysis that was done in 2015, so a year and a half ago, it shows about a little over 6% were foreign-born in Allen County. Now, that is an estimate, which is actually more than the foreign-born count for the entire state of Indiana, which is just shy of 5%. And then Allen County, the foreign-born population is close to 8%. It's more difficult to get an estimate for refugee numbers. In regard to the Burmese population, the one that I feel most comfortable with after working with various individuals in the community the last 4 or 5 years, I'd say about 7,500. But even that's not exact. Because once they're resettled here, other folks come here after they've been resettled elsewhere. It's really hard to manage that traffic of people coming in and out because Fort Wayne has such a long-standing resettlement history with the Burmese population. People want to join friends and family here, and it's harder to track that. And I'd say probably just under 2,000 for other refugee communities, like from Africa, other parts of the world.
Okay. How did Fort Wayne get to be a refugee center?
Well, there are actually many, not exclusively, but there are actually many faith lead organizations in the country that resettle refugees. Church World Service, the Episcopal Migration Ministries. And so the Catholic Church here has been resettling refugees since the early 70s because they are connected to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and more specifically the Migration and Refugee Services therein. So that is an important ministry for the U.S. Conference, and that's why we've had refugees here for over 40-some years.
I think if you would go through some of the other agencies that you have listed here in the notes that I see in front of me, this is really interesting. You mentioned Church World Service and Episcopal Migration Ministries. What are some of the other ones on this list?
The Ethiopian Community Development Council, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, there's a Kurdish Human Rights Watch, the International Rescue Committee, the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. They settle a lot of individuals. State of Iowa Bureau of Refugee Services. World Relief is a big resettlement organization, and then there's the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. So,
and you may not know the answer to this question. It just popped into my head. Why Iowa, Fort Wayne, Indiana? Why not Los Angeles, New York City, San Francisco, Miami, places on the coast? Why more interior?
You know, I don't. I feel like I should know that, and I may have even heard over the years why that's the case. But my educated guesstimate would be that life is affordable here, and that the community can support them, meaning provide housing, or that there's ample housing, and there's work. Because it's one thing to resettle folks here, but you need to find them gainful employment. That basically the community the community has the capacity to support that. And then with the church connection, that's just an important part of the mission, and it actually has been in this community for over 100-some years. When you look at the importance of churches in resettling and immigrants coming to this community, I'd say those things combined is probably why a place like Fort Wayne is a resettlement destination.
And that makes sense. I know when I worked at the History Center, did a blog post about the Thiem knitting mills and how Philip Thiem, I don't want to use the word advertised, but advertised for young German women to come to the United States. And that getting immigrants was part of the way he got workers for him.
He was a huge supporter, almost activist-oriented sounding from my take on him historically, that he was a huge supporter of German, and he was English himself, I believe, right?
I don't remember.
I thought he was English.
I do know his grandson, Judge Phil Thiem, and he's a neat guy. So,
oh, really?
Yes.
Small world.
So if you are a refugee, explain the difference between a refugee and an immigrant, because there is a difference.
There is a difference, and it's actually quite simple. Immigrants choose to come here. They choose to resettle their lives here. They choose to move here. Refugees don't choose. They are fleeing their country and can't return due to fear of persecution, whether that persecution is based on their race, their religion, their nationality, or perhaps the particular member of a social group or political group. They are fleeing for their lives, literally.
Okay. And if you're seeking asylum, it's basically the same thing?
Asylees have a refugee status, but the difference is they've come to this country, and then they apply for, or they seek asylum because they don't want to go back home because of the same reasons. They're fearful of persecution. So they've already landed here and then petition the government to seek asylum, so they don't have to go back.
Now, I know that, my son's roommate, his family fled Cambodia, and he grew up in the United States. I think he was born in Cambodia, but grew up in the United States. He is now petitioning to become a U.S. citizen, and that's different. Apparently, he's not considered a refugee anymore since he grew up here, but he did not gain status as a citizen at that time. And it's been an interesting process for him because you just don't say, hey, I want to be a U.S. citizen and take a few classes and get your citizenship. It does take some time. But if you're a refugee, can you just say, hey, I'm a refugee and I want to come in, or does the State Department and the government have something to do with that?
They do require that they seek citizenship, and there's deferrals that can be made for that process. One of the prohibitions is it's costly. It's almost $700 to get American citizenship.
Right.
And when you've been here 2 years or less, that is a lot of income that can be used in other ways.
Yes.
So, and it's difficult. There's a sundry of, taking English language learning classes. That's the number one need in our non-English speaking community here in Fort Wayne, and we don't have the capacity for that. There aren't enough classes, long-standing classes. It takes a long time now this is the academic coming on to me, it takes a long time to learn another language. And the older you are when you resettle here, the harder it is. And that is in part biological. And then you bring in the social issues, like with the Burmese, a lot of the males are working outside the county. So the mothers are at home, single parenting, and maybe working themselves. How do they go to an English language class when they're single parenting? And I would think, well, just go drive there. Well, they don't have transportation or reliable transportation, and then who watches their children? So it's just not. It's not as easy as we can make we can offer a class and a curriculum. You have to get folks there, and that's it. It's those things that a lot of individuals who don't work in this area don't recognize. It's not that easy.
Now, I have heard that if you are a refugee, you have to be vetted by the State Department.
Correct. That and 2 other organizations of the government.
And this screening process is not an overnight thing.
No, it takes 3 years or longer. It's actually, and when refugees are going through that process, that vetting process, it's actually the most scrutinized of all ways to come to this country if you're from another country. They have to go through various registration and data checks, security checks, then there's the interview, and then there's the biometric security checks like the fingerprinting and whatnot. They go through cultural orientation, which I would love to sit in on. And they go through a medical check. It's not necessarily an examination, but it's a medical check. And then they hope for an assignment, and then they travel to the United States. But like I said, 3 years is the average amount of time it takes to come here.
So all of those things that you mentioned, and I agree, a cultural orientation, I would love to sit in on one
Right.
of those too. To try to explain the United States to someone from another country has got to be interesting. But that's all done before they ever hit the shores of the United States.
Correct.
Correct. Wow. And
So if you come here on a student visa, a work visa, or tourism, I think is the easiest visa to get. Tourism or I think tourism visa is the easiest to get. The vetting is so not to the standards of what it is for refugees. So the backlash when people, I'm not going there.
oh,
I'm not going there.
so if I'm say Japanese and I want to come to the United States as a tourist, I can pretty much do that without any big deal. But if I'm say from Myanmar and I want to move to the United States because I'm a refugee, it's going to be a whole lot tougher for me to do that than if I'm going to come to the United States and hopefully leave in the eyes of the government.
Well, and actually they're not taking it, to my knowledge, they're not taking new applicants from the camps in Malaysia or Thailand, where a lot of the Burmese are. Those that are coming yet today to this community and elsewhere are those who've been in that 3-year process or longer waiting to come.
So from 2014.
Well, correct.
Yeah.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. Or any time since then, plus 3 more years, or,
Yeah.
if it was like last year or something. Although they can still apply for family reunification. That's my understanding of it.
Okay. Now, we have refugees in Fort Wayne from Myanmar, formerly known as Burma.
Mm-hmm.
Where else do refugees who live in Fort Wayne come from?
Congolese from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And that's actually what the Catholic Church is expecting those numbers to just keep going up. There are still Cubans that are resettled here, Haitians, and a few Iraqi and Iranis.
Okay. Now, with the whole thing going on in Syria, I assume that we are getting... are we getting refugees from Syria?
Not in the Fort Wayne area.
Not in the Fort Wayne area.
They are down in Indianapolis, though.
Okay. You said something also last evening, or in conversation together, we have coffee together once in a while, about a holistic, comprehensive study of the immigrant population. Now, as a cultural anthropologist, I know you can explain that in academic language. Can you explain that to a layperson like me? What does that mean?
Sure. Well, as I said last night, the last most comprehensive study that's been done looking at various facets of immigrants in our community, demographically, the contributions they make, where the needs are, where the strengths are of this community and supporting them, that hasn't been done since 2001. So, and as you know, Nancy, there have been a lot of changes in our community in the last 16 years, and that will only continue. And so there is definitely a void in good research that looks at them comprehensively. Now, there have been micro studies that have been done, like in the health department and a couple of other organizations in the community, but they're only looking at little niche things, but no one has looked at them holistically again since 2001.
Okay, and if this were a perfect world, how often would you do something like that?
I think, and I'm going to call it a community needs assessment, but I also believe it's not just where we're lacking, but where our strengths as a community are, so maybe our community assets assessment. I think that should be done every couple of years.
Oh, wow. I can't think of the word. How detailed does something like that have to be? How long does it take to do that kind of a study?
It takes a good 2 years.
So once, if everything were perfect, once you got done with the study, you'd have to start another study all over again.
Yes.
And what kinds of groups then would take that study and work with it?
Well, the Northeast Regional Partnership, I'm sure, would be interested in the economic, economic development information that would be in there. Where are they working? What's their economic impact? I think a lot of our nonprofits, especially those that work with disadvantaged populations, and even more specifically those who work with immigrants and refugees, would find this information especially helpful to them in their reporting and to their grant writing. I also think our city government and our county government would appreciate knowing where we're at as far as a community and supporting our immigrant population.
Okay. Now, we mentioned a little bit about the yard sign program that you're doing. That was one of the first things that you did, correct?
Correct.
And those yard signs are how much if you want to buy one?
Well, we're not charging for them per se, but we happily accept donations.
Okay.
And that's we don't want to charge per se. This I was inspired to do this based on a story I actually heard on National Public Radio. Other communities around the country that have had similar campaigns, and I thought, hey, well, we can do this in Fort Wayne. So I found myself trying to find an artist and trying to find, a printer that could do this in the most economically affordable way. And it all came together right after Christmas, and we've been raising money ever since. It costs money to go into production, and this whole Welcoming Fort Wayne initiative that I've been steering for over a year now. This is. I do this on a voluntary basis, and I love this work. I'm passionate about this work, but it still costs money to make signs. So we encourage donations. $10 makes almost 3 signs, including the yard stakes. And I'm hoping we can make some window clings so we can have these in people's vehicles and storefronts and homes. Yard signs aren't allowed in a lot of our neighborhood associations. They have covenants that prohibit that. So I would like to work on these clings and get those made, and I can get those made fairly inexpensively. A $10 donation would pay for almost 17 clings. So it really is, we'll take donations big and small, and it all adds up, and it all helps us stay in production.
Okay, and if I want a yard sign now or a cling later on, where do I get one?
Okay. You can get those at Associated Churches at 602 East Wayne Street downtown. They'll be happy to get one for you.
Okay.
And for listeners, they can donate simply at welcomingfw.org, and there's a big donate button. You can click on that, and make sure, though, this is very important, that Welcoming Fort Wayne is one of many ministries at Associated Churches. Make sure you scroll down and click Welcoming Fort Wayne so that money comes directly. We're using all the money raised for this yard sign campaign only for that, nothing else. Okay.
What other, besides Associated Churches, what other groups are you forming partnerships with right now?
Sure. Well, this is still evolving, but we have a partnership with the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. About 60% of the clients they serve are immigrants with various issues, from health care to immigration issues. And I thought, this would be a nice way. We have an online portal of the intake documents that need to be filled out. What they were finding is that these intakes were taking a couple hours long in the office, and we thought a way to expedite that process would be to offer this online. Of course, they need access to online, and then they need someone to help translate these documents. But just one way to make it more efficient process, because 2 hours spent in the office with one client they could have helped other clients in that time frame. So those are the kinds of partnerships, things that make it easier for people to get what they need to live their life, to get done what they need to get done. So those are the kind of partnerships that we're seeking, ways to ease integration.
Now, I know in one of my past lives, I was an optician in the Omaha, Nebraska area. And at that time, Omaha was a Bosnian refugee center. Mm-hmm. And I worked for Shopko Optical, and we had a number of Bosnians come in to have eye exams. And their children were their translators, which I thought was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And a number of people from Latin American countries too. The kids,
mm-hmm.
I would have a little 5-year-old kid trying to explain a possible eye disease to the 5-year-old, who in turn would explain it to mom.
Sure.
Do you find that the kids are kind of like the translators for their parents?
They oftentimes do serve as the interpreters for their parents, but that's not a practice I would recommend to anyone. If it's in the healthcare arena, the healthcare provider is obligated to provide interpreters. That doesn't always happen consistently in this community. But you're putting that child, the liability there for a healthcare provider to rely on a 5, 6, 7-year-old to interpret, medical situations or legal situations, at a crime scene or something. First of all, that's just not ethical. It's not fair to that child. It's not fair to the person that they're trying to assist, and it's not fair to the police or a healthcare provider, because they need accurate information. There's a huge learning curve with that in this community, and it's starting.
So English as a second language classes are really important.
Very important.
Where are those offered?
Oh, they're offered around the community. Some churches still host those. There are programs, I believe, at Ivy Tech. Anthus offers that for their students all over the city, but there's just not enough of them and have enough capacity for large groups.
So if you are proficient in a language other than English, I don't know what kinds of languages are spoken in African countries, but that would be an example. Could you be a volunteer just by saying, hey, I'd like to volunteer, or is there training you have to go through? Do you know?
To teach English? There is a training, I believe, yes.
Okay. So, folks, if you're looking for something to do and you're bilingual, there you go. Now, you also have mentioned to me Welcoming Michiana and the Immigrant Welcome Center.
Sure.
What are those?
Yeah, the Immigrant Welcome Center is really the welcoming initiative down in Indianapolis. Terry Downs down there has been its director for some time. That initiative actually began out of the mayor's office, and it was her that myself and a handful of folks over a year ago went to go visit as we were thinking about creating this welcoming Fort Wayne and what we'd want that to look like. And she's offered me a lot of guidance since then. And then Welcoming Michiana is an effort that's rooted in the South Bend area. They're looking at organizing two, and I've met with them, and they do have mayoral support. So we're hoping to be able to work together, and we have plans to travel to Welcoming Toledo to see what good work they're doing up there.
And Welcoming Michiana is in South Bend, is that correct?
That's where the lead organizer lives, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
South Bend, Mishawaka area. You have also talked to me a little bit about Welcoming Week in September. Can you give us some more information about that?
Sure. I believe it's September 14th to the 25th. It's usually like for 10, 12 days, the third week roughly of every September. And this is a week where communities can celebrate or do things in honor of their immigrant refugee population. So this last year for 2016, I organized with a wonderful committee from various folks in the community a refugee summit, which was a day-long healthcare event that looked at refugee health disparities and ways to bridge those healthcare gaps. And it was a very successful event. And Indiana Tech also had 2 events that week, one that celebrated those with Arabic heritage. So we're encouraging anyone in the community, whether it's a business, a nonprofit, a church, or even student groups, to do something during that time frame in honor of. So it could be a potluck, it could be cleaning up a park in honor of our immigrant population, it could be anything you'd want it to be. There's actually a lot of good examples on the Welcoming America website of things you can do. And the neat thing about that is that you can register each of these Welcoming Week events through the national organization. It's online, it's super easy. And I would love for Fort Wayne to have 10 or more different events during that 10, 12-day period to show the country, hey, look at all the good things that are happening here in Fort Wayne during Welcoming Week. So I encourage listeners to think about ways you can celebrate our immigrant heritage here and the immigrants that we have here today.
So as we look at immigrants, we've been talking quite a bit about differences in language, differences in culture, when I guess language is a part of culture. But I know last night at the People for the Common Good meeting that we had here at the library, that was organized here at the library, there were a couple of organizations there of people who are Muslims. So do you address differences in religions also? Because there's quite a difference. There are a lot of different religions represented in Fort Wayne.
Sure, and that's something, even with Associated Churches as our fiscal sponsor, that's something that they embrace too, that this is our community's reality. It's diverse, not just ethnically, but also religiously.
Okay. Now I know Universal Education Foundation does programs with the Muslim community and interfacing with other faith communities. There's always an event every year, Taste of Ramadan. There are Buddhist groups here, Hindus, Sikhs, Christians and Jews, obviously. And Fort Wayne had the oldest Jewish congregation west of New York City at one time. So I've always thought that was really interesting. Fort Wayne, Indiana. I
didn't know. I knew.
Yes.
Wasn't Akhdut Vashalom that was the first in Indiana, but I didn't know it was the first.
I think it was one of the, yeah.
That is fascinating.
And Akhdut Vashalom now has the Madge Rothschild Center now opened this past weekend, and they have a museum there. And I will tell you, having taken photographs of items from the Jewish tradition, you are missing out if you have not done some study of that. Very, very interesting.
I look forward to visiting it myself.
Yeah. Now, are you going to do a refugee summit again this year, or do you have what have you planned for this year?
No, there's not a refugee summit in the works, but what I am organizing in partnership with Indiana Tech is our first annual fundraiser. And it's going to be an evening during Welcoming Week, most likely September 19th. That's what we're targeting. And we're going to have, it's a feel-good event, but it's one that we want to, it's a celebration, right? It's a fundraiser. We want to raise funds for either the certification process or other welcoming initiatives, so we can do more with our welcoming work. We'll have cultural performances. We're going to have testimony from newly arrived immigrants at this event. We're going to have a silent auction. We'll have lots of yummy food. And
food is always good.
And they'll even their multicultural club will most likely do some henna tattooing there too, because that's always very popular when they have these kinds of events. So I'm very excited about this event, and I hope we can raise some money to do the work that needs to be done in this community.
Okay, and there is a multicultural council here in Fort Wayne.
Yes, there is.
What did they do?
They and I was an active member of that group for a long time, and I'm actually going to talk about welcoming Fort Wayne at this month's meeting. They have several work groups that work on different initiatives in regard to the multicultural community. They have a healthcare, mental health work group. They have a public safety work group. So they put on programs and whatnot to inform. Well, to inform the lay public and providers, but to also inform the immigrant community, and not just to inform, but to honor, too. They're also the folks that organize the International Village at Three Rivers, which is the last Friday, Saturday of Three Rivers Festival, and that's always a very successful event.
And there is an organization in town that I learned of when I worked at the YWCA. It was just getting off the ground. At that time, it was Crime Victim Care. Crime Victim Care, and Sunita Mako, who is from Kenya, founded that. He has since moved to Indianapolis, I believe, and the name of the organization is now Amani.
Amani Family Services.
And Irene Paxia is, and she's from Italy, and they work with refugees and immigrants who have been victims of crime.
Victims of crime, but those who also have other needs. And they exclusively only work with immigrants and refugees, which is fairly unique for this community.
Good organizations and good peoples. Good people. So what are your plans for the future? Where are you going to go with this?
Well, the yard sign campaign's been very popular. I know that those awareness campaigns are very important. So we will continue that in different ways. I would like to create a volunteer base as funding comes in and as these campaigns go and the PR events that I'm doing for welcoming Fort Wayne. I need help. We do have an advisory committee now, and I'm very grateful to all of them. I would love to, over time, do some educational event planning, expand our partnerships. Language and culture are closely connected. I've taught that class several times in my former life as an academic. So I think there needs to be some work that we do in partnership with language here in this community. And there's also been interest from different sectors in the community of possibly welcoming Fort Wayne in part serving as a research arm for immigrant issues. I already spoke to the lack of a holistic, comprehensive look at immigrant issues and whatnot in this community for over 15 years. And that's time that changes. So there's a lot of opportunity and potential for growth here. So I'm excited to see where all this takes us.
Okay. We've talked a little bit about what is a refugee, and it every time I see news footage of Syria, I just am amazed and appalled at what has happened to that country. Now, one of the statistics I saw was that 40% of Syria's population, which would be about 7.6 million people, have been displaced since 2011. Highest number in the world at this point.
Still living in their country, but not living in their home.
Okay, so that doesn't mean that they are a refugee. They are...
Maybe, but not by the standards we define,
okay.
As far as them coming to this country. But if I were them, I would think I'm a refugee if I'm living in another part of the country and being detained, and I'm not living at home and have... I'm not living a sustainable life anymore. I think there's a semantic flip there.
Okay. And there are stateless persons in the world, which means that you are not recognized by any country.
That person isn't recognized as having a nationality by... My understanding is by that specific country, like the Rohingya in Myanmar or Burma. There are Rohingya being resettled here in this area. So I think for the purposes, based on what I've seen here, the U.S. State Department considers Rohingya a persecuted ethnic group within Burma because they're not even recognized as a people. So they can come here as that, recognized as that status. But it's sort of a nebulous status.
So could this be any more complicated?
No, not at all.
No. We have, with the State Department, Homeland Security is now a part of what goes on with refugee resettlement. And so does Homeland Security have the final say-so on whether or not a refugee can come to the United States?
I believe there's three different divisions of government, but I believe the State Department is the paramount organization that makes those decisions. Don't quote me on that, but that's just been my understanding.
Okay. And I know you gave me the statistic that in fiscal year 2016, the United States welcomed almost 85,000 refugees.
Well, I think bias across the board, political bias, I think bias in the media. There's all kinds of reasons. The way Africa, when it is portrayed, is usually not in a very positive light. So when it is portrayed, it's very, it's negative. It's horrific images. It's and people want to watch the news and feel good about the world around them, but that's just not the reality. And you're not going to get that on our major networks nightly.
I noticed today in reading one of the newspapers that I read that if there were no crime in America, there wouldn't have been a morning edition. So, which is too bad.
I've heard
too
that
bad.
too.
There's a lot of good stuff that goes on in the world, and that's one of the reasons we have this show. So what are some of the positive things that welcoming Fort Wayne does to our community or for our community?
Well, I think we're moving the needle in getting a sense of people's interest, their compassion for immigrants. So that's been exciting to me. The Facebook following we have, please like us. Welcoming Fort Wayne is very faithful. I think almost everyone who's liked our page is also following our page. And that's not always the case. You can like a lot of different things on Facebook, but that doesn't mean you want to follow what's trending on that page. And people are, and I mean this metaphorically, of course, are starving for information about our immigrant population. So news articles, pictures. I've been posting a lot of pictures of individuals and organizations that have that yard sign, and the traction that gains. People want to see this positive messaging. They want to stay informed. But even beyond, the PR side of it is, I'm hoping it makes newcomers feel more welcomed. I've been approached over the last 2-3 months, people thanking me, and they were strangers to me. It was a newcomer who said, "Thank you so much for doing this." And I said, "Well, you're welcome, but this is for all of us. This is for all of us." So I feel like this is raising the social conscious of the greater community. We need our immigrant community here. We're a city of immigrants and have been for a long time, and they make, and my ancestors, because I'm a Fort Wayne native, made lots of contributions and continue to make contributions in this community. And I'm excited to see as we move forward what other partnerships and initiatives that Welcoming Fort Wayne can help be a part of to ease that integration, because moving somewhere, not knowing the language of their culture is just hard. It is so hard.
Now, I know I read somewhere several years ago that if you move to New Zealand as an immigrant, that New Zealand spends 2 years educating you and getting you adapted to a new culture.
Well, that's wonderful. I've never heard that.
Well, I thought, wow, 2 years. I mean, that's a long time, but it's a whole lot less time in the United States. I mean, you're almost sink or swim, aren't you?
Well, it's not done comprehensively in this community. I can speak to that. And that's something I would love to see Welcoming Fort Wayne consider down the road. And of course, that's the educator in me speaking. But Indiana Tech does a great job with their 15% of their student body are immigrants. And they do a really nice job in helping them with easing that culture shock. Pat Bowles at the Anthus Career Center does that with his English language learners. The Catholic Church also provides some cultural integration. But as far as someone helping a newcomer say this is this is how hygiene's practiced here, this is how house maintenance is practiced here, and this is how, this is the importance of going to a parent-teacher conference, all those things that they may have never experienced elsewhere. No one is doing that comprehensively for our newcomers. So it is trial and error, and sometimes that doesn't end up so good for them.
And if you've ever been to a foreign country or New York City, you know that being in a different culture it can be intimidating. So I think you have to give refugees, particularly who have been through so much anyway and who are now moving here, you have to give them a lot of credit. They have a lot of courage, a great deal of courage.
And this is by no means any kind of comparison, but I've often asked my students over the years who's experienced culture shock. And, I've traveled abroad and I've lived in different parts of the U.S. And they're always surprised to hear the culture shock I had the most was when I lived in South Georgia.
Really? Interesting.
It was socially so different. Food, the pace. I remember one time my daughter and I sat in a drive-thru and it took 10 minutes for them to hand me my ice cream cone. We're like, wow, life is really different down here. I mean, I've been to New York City. I have family in New York City. I've traveled abroad, but it was everything was just so different. So you can experience culture shock even in our own country.
That's true. Our son lives in Brooklyn, New York, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I wouldn't get on a subway alone to save my soul. Okay, we've been talking with Melissa Reinhart of Welcoming Fort Wayne. Melissa is a member of the League of Women Voters, and I want to tell you a little bit about the League. We are an organization that was founded in 1920 when women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. We will have had the right to vote for only 100 years of our country's history in 2020. So if you think voting is not important, please know that women went to jail so that they could get the right to vote, and that's a very interesting part of our history. We do have a particular interest at this time in the redistricting issue in our state, and if you are interested in redistricting and having someone come visit and talk to your particular group, your neighborhood, group of friends, whatever, about redistricting, you can go to our website, which is www.lwvfw.org. And down toward the bottom in the left-hand corner of the home page, you can click on a link with my name, Nancy McCammon Hansen, and send me an email, and I will put you in touch with the people who are doing the redistricting education. The national chapter of the League of Women Voters, the national organization's website is LWV.org for League of Women Voters. In Indiana, it's LWVIN.org. And let me tell you, there is a ton of information out there about voting and political issues. We are a nonpartisan group, so if you're tired of vitriol, we may be the place for you because it's important for all of us to be involved in the political process in our country. We also have a Facebook page that we post quite a few different articles on about what's going on in our country, different perspectives of different issues. And we encourage you to like our Facebook page, League of Women Voters, Fort Wayne Area, and follow us that way. We also have on our website a couple of different pages. One includes the links to the different radio shows that we have done. We've done a really interesting variety of shows in the past several months. And so if you would like to listen to those, you can go to our website, lwvfw.org, and click on, I believe at the top it says radio programs is where you click. There is also a link about books that our members have read that we recommend. I'm a great reader. I would rather read than do just about anything. And we have a few other members who are that way too. And so books that we have read that we recommend for people to read are there on that website. You will never stop learning if you want to be a good citizen, and we want you to have an easy way to find some good things to read. We have a lot of things coming up this year. We're going to be out at different events registering people to vote because there is a primary next year and an election next year. So if you are not registered to vote, you can do so online, or you can come to one of the events where we're going to be, and we'll post those on our Facebook page, and we'll get you registered to vote. We hope to have some education for nonprofits in this area about absentee ballots, because that is something that can really make a difference for a lot of folks if they are disabled or they're elderly. Never know how the health is going to be on a particular day, particularly the day of the election. You can vote by absentee ballot, so we want to do some more education about that. If you are interested in partnering with us on a program, do keep in mind that, once again, it has to be nonpartisan. We're not going to go out and pick it against a candidate or an elected official. But if you want to educate voters on a particular topic, once again, you can send me an email via our website, and we will take a look at it and get back to you. You are listening to Policy Matters on WELT Radio 95.7 in Fort Wayne. WELT comes to you from the main library downtown and via the tower at IPFW. WELT is also generously funded by the Friends of the Library, a wonderful group to which I belong. Friends of the Library encourages all Allen County residents to come to any branch library, get a library card, and check out a few books. You will be glad that you did. Once again, this is Nancy McCammon Hansen of the League of Women Voters. I'm thanking Melissa Reinhart, who has been speaking with us today about welcoming Fort Wayne. And we invite you to get involved in politics this year, get involved in your country, because bad politicians are elected by good people who don't vote. Thank you.
Thank you.